The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the empty street as the sound of revving engines echoed through the air. She heard the rumble before she saw him. The biker. He zoomed past, his leather jacket flapping against the wind, his engine roaring like a beast. But the sound that followed was something else entirely. It wasn't the purr of the motorcycle. It was the screech of her dog, a sharp, high-pitched cry that made her stomach drop. She turned to see Max, her loyal German shepherd, lying on the cold asphalt, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. For a moment, everything froze. The world held its breath. The biker didn't stop. He barely glanced over his shoulder as he sped away, thinking nothing of it. He'd kicked the dog. Just a joke, just some harmless fun. But to the little girl, to the child who had watched that dog grow from a pup, it was more than that. Max wasn't just any dog. He was her lifeline, her strength, the only constant in a world that had crumbled around her. And now he was hurt. The pain surged through her chest, and the tears came in a flood, not just for Max, but for herself. For all the days she had leaned on him, trusting him, relying on him to keep her steady. He had never let her down before. Now as she knelt beside him, her hands shaking, she wasn't sure if she could keep her own promise to him. To protect him, to never let anything hurt him. Not like this, it happened so fast. The world seemed to spin as she knelt on the cold pavement, her hands trembling as they hovered over Max's side. He didn't move, his body stiff and unnaturally still. The little girl felt her heart break in the silence, her breath caught in her throat. Max was never still. He was the kind of dog that lived to move, to be by her side, to run through the streets with her, to keep her grounded. But now, the only movement was her hand, gently stroking his fur as her mind raced with disbelief. She'd always trusted Max. From the very first day they had met, she had known he was different. He wasn't just a dog, he was a shield, a silent guardian against the world. But today, that trust had been shattered by a joke. A cruel joke from a biker who didn't know what he had done. She wanted to scream, to run after him and make him understand the weight of his actions. But she couldn't. The only thing she could do now was hold Max, praying that he would be okay, praying that the world would not fall apart because of this one senseless act. Max's breathing was slow, shallow, and it made her heart ache. He wasn't moving, wasn't even lifting his head. She bit her lip, forcing back the tears, trying to stay strong for him, but her hands shook uncontrollably. "Please, Max," she whispered. "Please, don't leave me." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in years, she felt small, vulnerable, as if the world she had built around herself was crumbling, piece by piece. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not ever. But as the sound of the biker's engine faded in the distance, the little girl realized something else. She had lost more than just her dog. In that brief moment of chaos, her sense of security had shattered. The streets, once a place of comfort, now felt foreign, full of potential danger. And in her gut, a sickening thought settled. What if this was only the beginning? What if the world she had come to know was no longer safe? The street was still. It felt hollow. The distant hum of traffic, the soft rustling of the wind in the trees, all seemed so distant now. The world carried on, oblivious to the pain unfolding on the asphalt. She couldn't understand it. How could they just move on? How could the world keep spinning when her world had stopped? Max's body was still on the ground, and she couldn't move him. Not yet. She couldn't leave him here alone. The biker hadn't stopped, hadn't even glanced back. The little girl's chest tightened as she looked around, hoping to see someone, anyone, who could help. But the street was empty, save for a few passing cars. It was as if the universe had turned its back on them, leaving them in this lonely, cold place. She reached into her pocket for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. But when the call went unanswered, the desperation in her grew. She needed help. She needed someone to tell her everything would be okay. But all she could do was hold Max's head in her lap, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. The tears she had been holding back broke free, slipping down her face. She wasn't sure if they were for Max or for herself. Her whole life had been about pushing forward, staying strong. But in that moment, as she looked at Max's broken body, all her walls came crashing down. She wasn't strong. She wasn't invincible. She was just a little girl, sitting on a cold street, watching the dog who had saved her life, now struggling to stay alive. The silence around her was suffocating. It had been hours since the incident, but the little girl hadn't moved. Max had been rushed to the animal hospital, and now all she could do was wait. Her hands were still trembling from the shock, from the anger, from the helplessness that had taken root in her heart. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her head. The biker, the kick, the way Max had crumpled, the way he had looked at her, eyes wide with confusion, as if asking her why the world was so cruel. Max had been with her through everything. She thought of the dark nights when her own world had seemed impossible to bear. Max had been there, his warm body curled around her, his steady breathing a reminder that she was not alone. Now, she felt that absence acutely. She had always known that Max had been trained for something bigger. As a service dog, he had been trained to detect her anxiety, to ground her when the world became too overwhelming. But what had never occurred to her was that Max was also her protector. Not just in the way he kept her safe from her own mind, but in the way he had been the silent guard, standing between her and a world that was too often indifferent to the vulnerable. But now, with Max struggling to breathe, with his side bruised and battered, the little girl realized just how fragile the world they had built really was. The pain of seeing him so helpless was unbearable. And yet, she knew she couldn't give up on him. She wouldn't. Not after everything they had been through together. Max's recovery was slow, but it was steady. The little girl stayed by his side through every moment, every tear, every sleepless night. She didn't leave him alone, and slowly, as if to reassure her, Max began to respond. His eyes brightened when he saw her, his tail gave a weak thump when she spoke his name. But it was more than that. Each day, she felt the weight in her chest lift just a little. She hadn't realized how much she had needed him. Not just for his strength, but for his presence. For the way he had anchored her to the world when everything else had been too chaotic. There were moments when she would sit with him, her fingers tracing the contours of his face, and she would think of the life they had almost lost. Of the biker, of the moment she thought everything was over. But now, as Max's wounds healed, so did she. They were both scarred, but those scars were a part of them now. A reminder of the strength it had taken to survive. The scars they carried weren't marks of weakness. They were symbols of endurance, of resilience, of how together they could face anything. The biker came back. He stood in the doorway of the animal hospital, looking sheepish, his eyes filled with regret. But the little girl wasn't angry anymore. There was nothing he could say that would take away what had happened. But there was something in his voice that told her he had learned something from this. He wasn't the same man who had kicked Max out of ignorance. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need anyone to fix the past. What mattered now was that Max was by her side again, and they were moving forward. Together. As they walked out of the hospital, the sun had set, and the world felt a little bit quieter, a little bit softer. Max walked beside her, his step steady, his head held high. And the little girl, she walked with him, knowing that no matter what the world threw their way, they would face it together. The days that followed were a blur. The world around the little girl moved with the same rhythm it always had, but she felt somehow removed from it, like she was walking through a fog. School was hard. Every hallway, every classroom felt like an echo of the life she used to lead. Before the biker, before Max's injury, before everything had changed. The faces of her classmates blurred together, their voices unintelligible, a constant buzz in her ears that couldn't drown out the quiet fear gnawing at her insides. She spent hours after school with Max, letting him drag her into the quiet park, away from the noise, away from the pressure. He was healing. She could see it in his eyes, in the steady rhythm of his breathing, in the way his ears perked up at every sound, his body growing stronger by the day. But despite his recovery, the weight she felt remained heavy. The truth lingered in her mind like a dull ache. The biker's kick had not only damaged Max, it had damaged the way she saw the world. She couldn't erase the image of him lying on the asphalt, helpless and vulnerable. It was a wound deeper than anything physical, one that she wasn't sure she could heal. Max, though, he never seemed to carry that weight. He would nudge her gently, his head resting against her knee, as if telling her it was okay to let go. His eyes, full of empathy, spoke a language she could understand without words. In his quiet, unspoken way, he was helping her heal. And yet, as she gazed into the distance, she wondered if healing was even possible. Could a broken trust ever truly be mended? Could she ever find a way back to that place of peace they once shared, when the world felt safe and whole? It wasn't just about the biker anymore. It wasn't even just about Max's injury. It was about the emotional fracture, the small, lingering fear that she carried with her every moment. She wanted to believe that everything would return to normal. But normal, it seemed, had slipped through her fingers like water. What would it take to fill the emptiness inside her? Max, ever the steadfast companion, didn't give her the chance to linger in the darkness for too long. He nudged her again, this time harder, his tail wagging with a playful energy that reminded her of the dog he used to be. A smile tugged at her lips as she watched him spin in circles, his joy infectious. And for the first time since that fateful day, she felt a spark of something warm, something that had been buried deep inside her. Maybe it wasn't all lost. Maybe, just maybe, there was still light left. As she followed Max through the park, the sun dipping low on the horizon, she realized something important. Healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but learning to move forward with the weight of those moments, accepting them as part of the journey. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be fast. But as long as she had Max by her side, she could face whatever came her way. They stood at the edge of the park, looking out at the open field. The breeze caught the last light of the day, making the grass sway gently. She could feel the weight in her chest, the tension that had been there for weeks, start to lift. Just a little bit. Max sat beside her, his fur soft under her fingers, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though watching for something just beyond reach. For the first time in what felt like forever, the little girl could breathe again. She didn't have all the answers, but she was starting to find the path back to herself, one step at a time. And Max, her loyal protector, was there, steady, unwavering, reminding her that together, they could face anything. Max's recovery had been a slow, steady process, but it wasn't just his body that was healing. It was her soul. She'd learned to trust again, not just in Max, but in herself. There were days when the fear crept back in, when she remembered the horror of watching him hurt, when she thought about the biker who had caused it all. But those days were fewer now. She had learned to push them aside, to focus on the moments that mattered, the moments with Max. One afternoon, a few weeks after the incident, they returned to the same street where it had all happened. The road that had once felt so foreign, so unsafe, was now just another part of their journey. The little girl felt a quiet strength building inside her, as if the very act of walking down that road was a declaration that she was not afraid. Max walked beside her, his body strong and sure, his presence a constant reminder of what it meant to heal. The biker never showed up again, and while the girl had once thought she needed his apology, she now realized that it wasn't the biker's words that mattered. It was the way she had found her own voice, the way she had learned to stand tall again, with Max by her side, no longer needing anyone's permission to move on. They passed the spot where Max had been hurt. The asphalt was still scarred, the memory of that moment still fresh in her mind. But now, as she stood there, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was enough. She had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing it, understanding its weight, and finding the strength to keep moving forward. With Max beside her, there was no fear, only the promise of what was yet to come. And as they walked on, the sun setting behind them, the little girl knew that no matter what, she would always have Max, her protector, her companion, her best friend. Together, they had survived the worst, and together, they would continue to walk into the future. Stronger than ever. There was no end to their journey, only a new beginning. The weeks turned into months, and the world around the little girl started to settle. The voices at school grew clearer, the faces more familiar, and the anxiety that had once clawed at her chest began to soften. She still carried the memory of Max's injury, still felt the remnants of that cold moment when her world had shattered, but now those memories didn't have the same sting. They were a part of her, yes, but they no longer defined her. She had learned something in the slow recovery of both Max and herself. That pain, though unavoidable, was not permanent. It passed, and in its place, something stronger grew. But it wasn't just the bond between her and Max that had healed. She began to see how the world around her had changed, how the people she interacted with each day were more present, more connected. The accident, in its devastating way, had rippled out, reaching beyond the two of them. It had awakened something in those who had witnessed it, a collective empathy, a reminder of how fragile life could be, how small actions could have far-reaching consequences. The local news had picked up on the story of the little girl and her service dog. It spread quickly, touching people in unexpected ways. Letters began to arrive, cards, small gestures of kindness from strangers who had heard about Max's ordeal. There was one letter from an older woman who shared how she had lost her own service dog years ago, and how reading about Max had brought back memories of the connection they had shared. "He may be a dog," the letter said, "but they are never just dogs, are they? They are the silent heroes in our lives." The little girl couldn't help but cry as she read the words, feeling the weight of that truth settle deep in her heart. And then, there were the calls. People who had seen the biker's footage, those who had witnessed his apology in person, all wanting to share their own stories. Some of them had been through similar traumas. Others simply wanted to say thank you for showing them that strength could come from vulnerability. The ripple effect had begun, and it was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, as the little girl sat with Max, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon, she realized how far they had come. Max had fully recovered, his energy returning with each passing day. The days of limping, of pain, were behind him. He was the same dog she had always known, loyal, steadfast, and full of life. But now there was something else. He had become a symbol, not just for her, but for others. Max had shown them all that resilience wasn't just about surviving. It was about learning to live again, even after everything had been broken. It was on that evening, as Max trotted beside her, that the little girl realized the true magnitude of their journey. It wasn't just about the biker or the accident. It was about the process of reclaiming what had been lost. It was about the quiet strength that came from continuing, even when it seemed impossible. It was about the power of connection, between people, between animals, and within herself. Max had helped her find that connection, and in return, she had helped him rediscover his own purpose. Together they had healed. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of fresh rain as the little girl and Max wandered through their favorite park. They had made this walk a daily ritual, a symbol of their recovery, a marker of how far they had come. It was a time for them to reconnect, to simply be in each other's presence, without the weight of the world pressing down on them. It was on one of these walks that she realized how much the world had come to appreciate their bond. As they passed by a small group of people sitting on a bench, an older man smiled at them, nodding toward Max with a knowing look. "That's a service dog, isn't it?" he asked softly. "Yes," the little girl said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "He's been through a lot, but he's still my best friend." The man chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "He's lucky to have you," he said, before turning back to his newspaper. She paused, looking down at Max, whose eyes met hers with a silent understanding. In that brief exchange, the little girl realized that Max's journey wasn't just about them anymore. It had become a story that others could relate to, one that spoke to the power of connection, of resilience, of love. Max had become more than just a dog to her. He had become a symbol of what it meant to overcome, to rebuild after something broken. It was in moments like this, fleeting and quiet, that the little girl felt the weight of everything fall away. She had once believed that the world was a place full of shadows and dangers, that the biker's kick was a reflection of the cruelty hidden beneath the surface. But now, with Max by her side, she understood that the world wasn't just full of darkness. It was also full of light, the light of kindness, of small gestures, of people who cared. It was the warmth of understanding that spread through the community, and the quiet moments of connection that made the pain of the past feel just a little less sharp. Max stood beside her, his body relaxed, his fur shining in the late afternoon sun. He was the same dog, but she was not the same girl. They had both changed, both grown, and in doing so, they had found their way back to one another, stronger, more whole, more aware of the beauty and fragility of life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in soft shades of gold and pink, the little girl and Max continued their walk, side by side. They were no longer just walking through the park. They were walking through life, one step at a time together. The final chapter of their journey wasn't about a single event, nor was it about any one person or moment. It was about the quiet, steady rhythm of life that they had rebuilt together. The little girl and Max had found their home again, not just in the house they lived in, but in each other's hearts. They had come full circle, not in the way they expected, but in a way that was far more meaningful. The world hadn't given them the answers they wanted, but in the end, it had given them something better. The understanding that the road to healing was never straight, but always worth the walk. The day would come when the memory of the biker would fade, the hurt would lessen, and Max's injury would become just another chapter in their story. But for now, they walked on side by side, their bond unbreakable, their hearts intertwined in a way that no one, not even the harshest winds of the world, could tear apart. Together, they had found the strength to heal, and together, they would continue to find their way home. The days had become softer now, the edges of their past struggles blurring into something more manageable. Time had done its work, smoothing the jagged scars that had once felt so sharp. The little girl found herself laughing more, smiling more, and slowly learning to embrace the simple, quiet moments that had once eluded her. The sound of Max's tail thumping on the floor, his excited barks when she arrived home. Those were the sounds of a life that had healed. The life she had once feared would never feel whole again. They had found a new rhythm, one that wasn't defined by trauma, but by the subtle beauty of each day. And it wasn't just Max who had changed. The little girl had grown into someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned the value of resilience, not just in others but in herself. She had discovered something important in the silence between the struggles. That growth didn't come from never facing hardship. It came from facing it and continuing, even when the world felt unbearable. She now understood that healing was not linear, that it was filled with moments of regression, but also moments of incredible growth. The pain from the past would never truly disappear, but she had learned how to carry it, how to move forward with it, without letting it define her. Max had become a companion in every sense. His once steadfast role as her service dog had transformed into something deeper. He was her anchor, but now he was also her joy, her source of laughter, and the reminder that love and companionship could heal even the most broken hearts. Max had become more than just a dog. He was a partner, a teacher, and a symbol of everything that had brought her to this moment. One evening, as they sat together in the park, the same park where they had spent countless hours recovering, she looked at him with a heart full of gratitude. The air was crisp, the sun setting low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. The soft sound of the wind rustling through the leaves was a gentle reminder of how far they had come. Max sat next to her, his head resting on her lap, eyes half closed in contentment. She stroked his fur gently, the familiar comfort of his presence settling her nerves. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. There were no more lingering fears about what the world could take from her. She had learned that nothing could ever truly be taken away. Not the love she shared with Max, not the strength they had built together, and certainly not the bond that had only grown stronger with each passing day. As she gazed out at the horizon, the sun dipping below the trees, she whispered to Max, "I'm ready now." Ready for what? Exactly. Ready to face the world, ready to move forward, ready to embrace the future with a heart that had been mended, piece by piece, with time, love, and the unbreakable bond they shared. And as the first star appeared in the sky, the little girl felt a quiet peace settle over her. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The road they had walked together had been one of hardship and healing, of loss and redemption. But now, standing at the threshold of a new chapter, she knew that nothing could ever truly break them again. Together, they had learned that home wasn't a place. It was a feeling that came from within, from the love they shared, and from the strength they had found in each other. And as they walked back toward the house, the quiet hum of the night wrapping around them, she understood that this was only the beginning. The future was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. With Max by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Knowing that together they could weather any storm. The world may have tested them, but in the end, it was clear nothing, no one, could ever take away what they had found together. Not the biker, not the darkness of that one moment, nothing. Because they had each other, and that was all they needed. And as the last of the daylight faded, the girl and Max continued down the road side by side, walking into the night, into their future. Unshaken, unbroken, and stronger than ever before. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, warm shadows over the quiet street. The world around her had shifted, gradually, without fanfare, into something more peaceful. The little girl stood by the window, watching as Max, her faithful German shepherd, lay sprawled on the floor beside her, his paws twitching in his sleep. His breathing was steady, rhythmic, a stark contrast to the days when she had feared he might never breathe again. It had been a few months since the incident with the biker. A few months since Max had been kicked, and since her world had felt as though it were unraveling, thread by thread. In the aftermath, she had sat by his side for days, too afraid to let him out of her sight. Now, looking at him, strong, vibrant, and full of life again, she realized that it hadn't just been his recovery that had been a miracle. It had been hers too. Max had always been her constant, her protector and her silent anchor, but she had never realized just how much of her own strength had been tied to his presence. When he had been hurt, it was as though the very foundation she had built her world upon had cracked open. She had been forced to confront a world she didn't fully understand, one filled with uncertainty and fear. She had been scared that she wouldn't be able to heal, that she wouldn't be able to fill the gaping hole left by his injury. But slowly, as Max had healed, so had she. There were days when the pain of seeing him vulnerable still haunted her, but those days were becoming fewer. Max was there, his tail wagging, his eyes shining with the same unwavering loyalty that had always comforted her. And through him, she was learning how to be strong again. It wasn't just the biker who had changed her life. It was the way she had chosen to face the pain, to allow herself to feel it, to let it run its course, and then to rise again. She had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying those painful moments with grace, accepting them as part of the journey. They were scars, but scars weren't weaknesses. They were reminders of survival, of the strength it took to keep going even when everything seemed broken. The air was cooler now, and the sound of leaves rustling outside brought her back to the present. Max shifted in his sleep, his body rising and falling with each breath. She walked over and knelt beside him, running her fingers through his soft fur. His eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. She smiled, a quiet, contented smile. "You're my best friend, Max," she whispered. He responded with a quiet whine, lifting his head slightly before resting it back on the floor. A small, affectionate nudge from his nose pressed against her hand. They didn't need words. They had always communicated in other ways. Through the way he would nudge her when she needed comfort, or how he would sit quietly beside her when the world felt too overwhelming. The little girl felt the weight of everything she had learned over the past few months. The world didn't always make sense, and sometimes it could be cruel, but she had Max. And through him, she had learned how to find the strength to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. She could never forget the biker's actions, nor could she erase the fear that had plagued her in those dark hours. But she could choose to walk away from it, to let it go and make room for what truly mattered. Outside, the world was slowly darkening, the soft hum of the evening settling in. She felt Max's warmth beside her, his steady presence grounding her. The memories of the past still lingered, but now they didn't have the same sting. They had become part of her story, part of the woman she was becoming. And with Max at her side, she knew there was nothing she couldn't face. The future, once so uncertain, now felt full of possibility. She had no way of knowing what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face them. With Max beside her, she knew she would never have to face anything alone again. And as the moon rose high in the sky, the girl and Max stood together at the window, looking out at the world they had once feared. It was no longer a place of danger, but one of endless opportunity. The world may have tested them, but they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. Max's tail thumped against the floor as he turned his head toward her, his eyes full of the same unwavering loyalty that had carried them through. She reached down and gently patted his head. The bond they shared had been forged in fire, and now nothing could break it. Together, they walked into the night, a new chapter beginning, a new journey ahead. The road was theirs to travel side by side, and nothing would ever tear them apart again. As they moved forward, they carried with them the strength of everything they had endured, and the promise that no matter what came next, they would always have each other.